I was just repairing her fence because that was the kind of man I had always been, the one who fixed things quietly, who didn't ask questions, who didn't expect anything in return. And when she stepped out onto the porch with her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied in a careless knot, I remember thinking that some people didn't realize how close they were standing to a turning point in someone else's life, because the day was ordinary, the sky was pale blue, the wood under my hands splintered the same way it always did. And yet something in the air felt heavier, like a held breath, as she thanked me softly and offered water, and we stood there talking about nothing, weather, neighbors, how storms always found the weakest part of a fence, and still, every word felt like it carried something unsaid beneath it, especially when she laughed, not loudly, but the kind of laugh that stayed with you long after it faded, and I noticed the way she watched my hands while I worked, the way silence between us didn't feel awkward but intentional, as if we were both listening for the same hidden signal. And when the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched across the yard, I realized I had slowed down without meaning to, stretching the work, because finishing meant leaving, and leaving suddenly felt like the wrong choice, even though I didn't yet understand why. And when she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, closer, not rushed, as she said the fence could wait, that it was getting late, and that sometimes broken things didn't need to be fixed right away. And I looked up at her then, really looked, and saw not invitation but vulnerability, not temptation but trust, and it unsettled me more than any bold move ever could, because this wasn't about desire alone, it was about two lonely lives brushing too close in a moment neither of us had planned. And when she leaned in just enough for me to smell rain in her hair and whispered, "Stay in my bed tonight, not yours," the world didn't explode, time didn't stop, but something quieter and more dangerous happened. I realized that one choice, one night, could redraw the lines of everything I thought I knew about myself. And if this story is pulling you in already, if you feel that slow burn, that emotional tension, then make sure you subscribe to the channel, because this is only the beginning, and the next chapter goes even deeper. I didn't answer her right away because some moments deserve silence before they deserve words, and as we stood there with dusk folding around us, I understood that what she was asking wasn't reckless, it was brave, because she wasn't offering a body. She was offering space, safety, closeness without guarantees, and I followed her inside not like a man chasing desire but like someone stepping into a room where the truth had been waiting all along, and the house was quiet, lived in, warm, filled with the kind of stillness that comes from someone who has learned to be alone for too long. And we talked through the evening about things people usually avoid: loss, regret, the nights that feel longer than they should, and when the lights dimmed and we finally lay down, there was no rush, no crossing of lines that needed explaining, just the simple, powerful act of sharing a place where walls come down, where breaths sink, where the distance between two people disappears not because of passion, but because of understanding. And I realized then that intimacy isn't always loud or dramatic, it can be quiet, steady, almost fragile, like a promise made without words. And as morning came and light slipped through the curtains, I knew the fence outside no longer mattered, because something far more important had been repaired inside both of us, something we hadn't known was broken until that night. And as I left later, with her smile following me to the door, I understood that some stories don't end with fireworks, they begin with honesty. And if you stayed until this moment, if this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel, because stories like this, raw, emotional, unforgettable, are shared here every time, and the next one might just stay with you even longer. I thought the story would end after that morning, that we would return to our separate lives with nothing more than a shared memory and a quiet understanding, but life rarely respects the endings we plan for it, and days later I found myself back at her fence, tools in hand, not because it still needed fixing but because some part of me needed to see whether what we felt had survived daylight and distance. And when she opened the door this time, there was no hesitation in her eyes, only recognition, the kind that says you were here before and you belong here again. And we spoke more openly than we ever had, about how that night had unsettled us in the best way, how it had exposed the spaces we had been pretending weren't empty. And as we walked along the fence line together, I realized that the real repair was no longer about wood or nails but about learning how to stand beside someone without armor, without pretending you didn't care where the line between you ended and they began. And she admitted she was afraid, not of me, but of hoping, and I admitted the same, because hope asks for courage most people don't realize they've lost until it's demanded of them. And in that shared honesty, something steady took root, not the rush of a single night but the slow, undeniable pull of two people choosing to show up again, and when I left that evening, knowing I would return not as a helper but as someone invited into her life, I understood that some connections don't announce themselves loudly, they grow quietly, stronger each time you choose not to walk away, and if this chapter made you feel that quiet intensity, that sense of something meaningful unfolding, then subscribe to the channel, because this story doesn't end here, and the next chapter will show what happens when two guarded hearts finally stop pretending they don't need each other. What surprised me most wasn't how easily I returned to her life, but how naturally it happened, as if something long delayed had finally resumed its proper course, and weeks passed where the fence stood finished yet somehow symbolic, no longer a boundary but a reminder of where everything began, and we learned each other in quiet ways, shared dinners that stretched into conversations about the futures we'd been afraid to imagine, walks that didn't need destinations, silences that felt full instead of empty, and there were moments when fear tried to reclaim its old ground, when one of us would pull back just enough to test whether the other would still stay, and every time, we did, choosing patience over panic, presence over pride. And one evening as the wind moved through the yard and the repaired fence creaked softly, she reached for my hand, not urgently but deliberately, the way someone does when they've decided to stop running, and she said that night had changed her, not because of what happened but because of what didn't, because she felt safe enough to hope again, and I realized then that love doesn't always arrive as a storm, sometimes it arrives as shelter, built plank by plank, choice by choice, until you look up one day and realize you're home. And if you've stayed with this story until now, if these chapters have pulled at something real inside you, then subscribe to the channel, because stories like this, slow, emotional, and deeply human, continue here, and the next one might feel like it was written just for you.